I was sitting in my small, peaceful apartment, drinking coffee, when the email arrived. It was cold, formal, and completely without feeling, just like the person who sent it. The sender was my mother, Cordelia. The subject line was mandatory attendance, Asher Dawson Memorial. Asher was my younger brother, and he had died 10 years ago in a terrible car crash. After his death, my entire family, my mother, my father Alistair, and my older sister Blair, had completely cut me off, blaming me for the tragedy. The email was a clear summons to a memorial service, stating my attendance was mandatory for the reading of the updated will. That was the real reason they wanted me back. Money. Not grief, just greed. The message was cruel, but it gave me the exact chance I had been waiting for all this time. I knew the truth about what happened that night, and it wasn't what they told the police. I stared at the screen for a long time, my hands shaking. I wasn't shaking from sadness or fear, but from a cold, simmering rage that had been building inside me for a whole decade. I felt completely ready. I walked over to my desk and opened a small, locked metal box that I kept hidden. Inside the box was a very old, heavy and very important cell phone. The one I had used 10 years ago. I took it out carefully. I had charged its battery every month for 10 years. On that phone was the key to their destruction and my freedom. I held the phone close to my chest, a small, sad warmth spreading through me. "It's time, Ash," I whispered softly to the old device. "It's finally time to tell the truth and pay them back." The long drive to the family estate felt like traveling back in time to a life I had thankfully left behind. The estate, named Havenwood, was huge and intimidating. A massive house made of dark stone and full of cold marble. It was a mausoleum. A beautiful house built only to hold their massive wealth and all their shared lies. The moment I stepped out of my car, I was greeted with instant, open contempt. My older sister, Blair, was the first to meet me. She didn't offer a hug or a kind word. She just looked me up and down slowly, her expression full of disgust. "Well, look what the wind blew in," she sneered, crossing her arms tightly. Then my father, Alistair, came out. He was as cold and imposing as the house itself. He didn't speak to me, only nodding stiffly, his eyes saying everything. "You don't belong here." I walked past them, feeling the full weight of their combined hatred. Everything in the house was exactly as I remembered it. Too formal, too expensive, and completely devoid of any real warmth or love. It was clear they had only asked me back for legal reasons concerning the will and nothing else. My heart ached for Asher, who had deserved so much more than this fake, cold family. I reminded myself that I wasn't there for sadness. I was there for justice. My mother, Cordelia, finally appeared from the drawing room. She didn't move toward me, or try to embrace me. She just looked me up and down, a critical, sharp glare in her eyes. "Try not to break anything this time, Juniper," she said, her voice laced with a strong warning, reminding me of the past accusations. The pre-memorial dinner was a quiet, tense event held in the massive, formal dining room. It felt more like a court session than a family meal. The three of them, Alistair, Cordelia, and Blair, spoke to me only in clipped, necessary sentences about legal details and schedules. All around the large table, the air was thick with the horrible, unspoken past and their complete hatred for me. Then Blair, with a carefully timed, false sigh, stood up to make a toast. It was an evil, perfectly executed piece of theater. She raised her wine glass high and said, "To dear Asher. Gone too soon, tragically taken from us by a reckless, irresponsible choice." As she finished the toast, she deliberately held my gaze, and every single eye in the room, including the few silent servants, cut sharply toward me, the complete exile. This was the exact planned dynamic they had created and repeated for 10 years. I was the reckless one. I was the one who caused my brother's death. They were recreating the precise moment that led to my total and complete exile from the family. They were trying to break me again before I could speak. But I wasn't the weak, grieving teenager they remembered. I felt a huge wave of pure determination wash over me. I stood up slowly, matching her confident smile with a softer, much more dangerous one of my own. I raised my own water glass. My voice was quiet, but it commanded attention and rang clearly through the silent, formal room. To tell the truth, I said, looking right at my father and my sister, who both tensed up immediately. May it finally have its day. After the excruciating dinner, I walked slowly outside into the massive gardens, needing the cool night air to clear my head. The tension inside the house was so thick I could barely breathe. I walked past the empty tennis courts and the beautiful, cold gazebo, remembering all the unhappy summers of my childhood there. As I walked, I saw Hector, the family's longtime, dedicated groundskeeper. Hector had been working for the family since before I was even born. He was a kind, quiet man with hands rough from years of planting and pruning. He had always been the closest thing to a truly loving grandfather that Asher and I had ever known. He was quietly clearing the plates from an outdoor patio where drinks had been served. As he carefully walked past me, he subtly and quickly slipped a small, folded piece of paper into my hand without looking up. His movement was so quick and quiet that no one could have seen it in the dim light. I immediately walked behind a huge, dense hedge and unfolded the paper. My heart pounded hard against my ribs as I read his small, shaky handwriting. The note was simple but incredibly meaningful. The weeping willow. Midnight. He knew you'd come back. The words were a direct message from Asher. A ghost reaching out from the grave. Asher had planned this. He had trusted Hector. The knowledge that my brother had anticipated this day, even 10 years ago, made me feel incredibly strong. I realized right then that I wasn't just fighting my horrible family alone anymore. I had a strong, silent ally right here in this horrible house, and Hector had been patiently waiting for me to return. I waited patiently for the whole house to fall completely silent, counting the slow minutes until midnight. When the time finally came, I slipped out of my old bedroom and walked quickly toward the huge, ancient weeping willow tree at the very edge of the vast property. Hector was already there, waiting patiently in the deep shadows. His face was a mask of deep sadness and quiet relief. "They shouldn't have done this to you, Miss Juniper," he whispered, his voice full of long-held anger. "And they shouldn't have done that to young Asher." He told me that he had kept his silence for 10 years, but he could no longer stand to see the family's lies and cruelty continue. He then shared a shocking, critical piece of information. Hector revealed that he had seen Asher arguing violently with my father, Alistair, on the phone and in the library just hours before the terrible, fatal crash. "It wasn't a loving argument, miss," Hector insisted. "It was a screaming match about money and danger." He then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, old-fashioned brass key. "Asher gave me this key to hold for him a few weeks before the accident," Hector explained, carefully pressing the key into my hand. "He told me, if something bad happens to me, you give this key only to Juniper when she comes back." The key was small and cold in my palm. It wasn't for a door at Havenwood. Hector confirmed my fear. It was the key for a completely private safety deposit box at a small, regional bank I had absolutely never heard of. The next morning, I pretended to go shopping, but instead, I drove immediately to the small regional bank Hector had mentioned. The safety deposit box felt like the final piece of my brother's careful, secret plan. I presented the brass key and my ID, and the bank officer led me into a small, private room. The moment I opened the small, heavy box, I knew my life was about to change forever. Inside, I didn't find jewelry or cash. I found pure, undeniable truth. The first item was a thick, old leather-bound ledger. It was Asher's meticulous, secret accounting book, detailing massive, systematic embezzlement from the family's charitable foundation. My father, Alistair, was stealing money meant for sick children. The second item was a grainy, slightly faded photograph of a scary-looking man with a completely distinctive, noticeable snake tattoo wrapping around his forearm. The man was clearly dangerous. Finally, there was a small, folded note from Asher himself. His handwriting was shaky but clear. The note read, "Juniper, if anything happens to me, I promise you it wasn't an accident. They are laundering money through the foundation, and Blair and father are involved and working together." Tucked carefully inside the last page of the ledger was a final, shocking discovery. A tiny, crumpled sonogram photo. It was labeled simply in Asher's handwriting, "Baby Dawson." My mind raced as I looked at the sonogram photo. I had always thought Asher and his girlfriend, Tessa, had died together in a horrible, tragic accident. I had always only grieved for my brother. But now this tiny photo told a much darker story. Tessa had been pregnant when she died. My family, Alistair, Cordelia, and Blair, had known about the pregnancy and had kept the truth completely hidden for 10 years. They had silenced the entire tragedy, making the crime against Asher and Tessa even more evil and unforgivable. They had hidden not just a brother's death, but the loss of a future grandchild, and the complete eradication of the Dawson name. I carefully put the photo back in the box, my sadness hardening into an unstoppable resolve. I carefully dug through the other papers in the box and found a piece of paper with contact information for Tessa's mother, who was named Eleanor. I knew that Eleanor was just as much a victim of my family's lies as I was. I knew I had to tell her the devastating, hidden truth. I slipped out of the bank and found a quiet spot in my car, taking a deep, shaky breath before making the call that would completely change both of our lives forever. Eleanor answered the phone quickly, her voice sounding tired but kind. "Hello," she said. I introduced myself, and when I mentioned Asher's ledger, I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. I knew then that I had found my second, powerful ally, the person who had suffered the most. I didn't have to explain much to Eleanor. She was quiet and composed, but her voice carried a deep, simmering pain. She told me she was never completely surprised by my call. She revealed that Tessa had been very worried and completely unhappy during the last few weeks of her life. Tessa had confided in her mother, saying she felt constantly watched and feared something dark was happening inside the Dawson family's business. Tessa had known about the secret ledger and the massive embezzlement from the family foundation. Tessa knew she was in danger, Juniper, Eleanor said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. She was planning to leave Asher that very weekend because she knew his family would never accept the baby. She only didn't leave because Asher promised to expose his father first. Eleanor then gave me the final, most terrifying piece of the dark puzzle. She revealed that she had received a sudden, urgent text message from Tessa just 1 hour before the terrible crash. Tessa was scared and clearly using code in her message. Eleanor repeated the exact words from the text, and my stomach completely dropped. Tessa's text said, "If anything happens to Asher or me, Mom, I love you. Look for a man called the Serpent." The Serpent. The name echoed loudly in my mind, a complete confirmation of the darkest truth I had suspected. The moment Eleanor said the name, I immediately connected it to the grainy photo I had found in Asher's safety deposit box. The photo of the scary-looking man with the huge, distinctive snake tattoo on his arm. I quickly used all my resources, the expensive, high-speed research tools I had learned to use over the last 10 years, to identify the man in the picture. Within an hour, I had the name and the dark background, Silas Rook. Silas Rook was no ordinary person. He was a known violent associate of organized crime in the city, a notorious hitman who specialized in making crimes look like accidents. This was no accident. This was cold, calculated murder. I immediately called Hector, the groundskeeper, and I asked him a single, simple question. His answer was the final piece of confirmation I needed. Hector told me that he had clearly seen a scary-looking man, matching Silas Rook's exact description, meeting with my father, Alistair, in a very private corner of the garden just 1 week before the accident. They were talking in low, intense whispers and acting completely secretive. I returned to my hotel room and immediately retrieved the old cell phone containing the critical voicemail. I put on my best pair of expensive headphones and pressed play. I had listened to this short message a million times over 10 years, but now, I listened with the full, complete context of a pregnant Tessa, a criminal father, and a hitman named the Serpent. I replayed the voicemail again, carefully separating the sound and the words from the intense emotional pain that usually accompanied it. For 10 years, I had focused only on the part where my sister, Blair, was screaming that she was the one driving the car that night. That was the huge lie they made me believe to exile me. This time, I listened to the background noise and the rest of the heated conversation. It wasn't just Blair's voice in the recording. It was my father, Alistair, arguing fiercely with her. Blair was hysterical, not about driving, but about the police. I heard Blair's high-pitched, completely terrified voice screaming, I won't be your scapegoat like Juniper. I won't do it. You handle Silas. You need to call off the hit. It's gone completely wrong. Alistair's voice was a low, steady rumble of cold control, ordering her to calm down and stick to the rehearsed lie. But the key was the words Blair used. She wasn't arguing about a simple car crash. She was arguing about a planned criminal action. The truth hit me like a physical blow, a wave of cold shock that left me breathless. The word hit echoed clearly in the silent, expensive hotel room, vibrating in my ears. It wasn't just a terrible accident or a reckless choice. It was a cold, calculated, planned murder, ordered by my father and my sister, and covered up for 10 years with me as their convenient scapegoat. I knew I couldn't handle the crushing emotional weight of this discovery alone. The cold, hard truth that my father had ordered my brother's murder was too much for one person to carry. I decided to confide my entire discovery, the ledger, Silas Rook, the voicemail, to my therapist, Dr. Evans. I desperately sought her professional guidance, needing to know I was making the right decision to expose the entire family publicly. I trusted Dr. Evans deeply. I had been seeing her for 5 years, and she knew everything about my deep emotional scars from the exile. I laid out the whole terrible story, from the safety deposit box to the word hit on the voicemail. But what I didn't know was the dark secret Dr. Evans was keeping. She was not the trustworthy doctor I believed her to be. Unbeknownst to me, Dr. Evans had an expensive, long-standing professional relationship with my mother, Cordelia. Cordelia had paid Dr. Evans for years to monitor me and report back on my psychological state. As soon as I left the office, Dr. Evans picked up her phone immediately and called Cordelia, betraying all my trust. Cordelia listened to Dr. Evans's whispered report, her face completely pale. She hung up the phone and immediately called Alistair. Her voice was cold and panicked as she delivered the devastating news. She knows everything about the foundation, and she knows about Silas. We need to accelerate our legal plan to discredit her, right now. The moment he heard the word Silas, Alistair knew that his entire empire was on the verge of complete collapse. His reaction was not one of panic, but one of cold, fast, criminal planning. He moved immediately to secure his 10-year-old lie. He knew he had to completely discredit me before I could play the voicemail, or present the ledger at the memorial. He went into my old bedroom at Havenwood. He was an excellent criminal planner. He carefully planted a small, nearly empty bottle of highly addictive prescription pills. Pills he had acquired years ago, deep inside a dusty jewelry box that only I would open. He wanted to recreate the narrative he had used 10 years ago. That I was an unstable, drug-addicted, completely unreliable person who was suffering from a massive breakdown. If I tried to speak up, they would immediately point to the pills and say, "Don't listen to her. She's having a drug-fueled episode." Alistair called Blair immediately, telling her exactly where the pills were hidden. Blair, who was equally invested in their dark secret, went straight to the jewelry box, retrieved the bottle of pills, and looked at them with a triumphant, evil sneer. Blair immediately presented the small bottle of pills to her mother, Cordelia, her voice full of pride at their cruel cleverness. "See, Mother?" Blair whispered. "We knew she was still unstable. She hasn't changed at all. This will be enough to completely silence her and make her look crazy." The sheer terror of knowing I was facing murderers who were actively planning to frame me pushed me to take one last, desperate chance. I knew I had to try to appeal to the smallest piece of humanity left in Cordelia's heart. I found her alone in the cold, formal drawing room and told her I knew the full truth. The murder, the embezzlement, and the cover-up. I pleaded with her, not as the family black sheep, but as one mother to another, asking her to finally confess and choose justice over her criminal husband and daughter. Cordelia looked at me with cold, quiet disgust. She didn't deny the murder or the embezzlement. She simply stared at me for a long moment, a cruel, cold expression replacing any semblance of maternal warmth. "You appeal to me as a mother?" she asked, her voice quiet but utterly devastating. "You have no right, Juniper." Then, she delivered the final, life-shattering blow, the secret she had kept for decades. "Listen closely, because this is the last time I will ever speak to you. You are not my daughter. Your mother was Alistair's mistress, a terrible, common woman. I raised you only out of cold, silent duty to the family name. And you have been nothing but a constant disappointment, and a dangerous loose end since the day you were born." I stood there completely frozen, every piece of my history and my entire identity shattering into a million pieces around me. I was not a daughter. I was a child of duty, a complete mistake, a total lie. I left the room reeling, the horrible sound of her cold words ringing in my ears. I found Hector outside, tending silently to the rose bushes, his face still etched with deep concern for me. When he saw the utter devastation in my eyes, he knew immediately that Cordelia had delivered a fatal blow to my heart. I told him what she had said, and his own sadness deepened. He confirmed the terrible, unbelievable truth. My biological mother, Exiled, had not died in the car accident that they always claimed. She had been paid a huge sum of money by Cordelia to completely disappear, and never speak to Alistair or me again. "She was a kind, beautiful woman, Miss Juniper," Hector whispered, his eyes full of respect. "She loved you more than anything. But your mother, the lady of the house, was a cold, powerful woman, and she knew exactly how to make people disappear. Exiled never wanted to leave you, I promise you that. She cried for weeks before she took the money and left. She only did it because she feared for her life and yours." The cruel, painful weight of Cordelia's lie lifted slightly, replaced by a strange, quiet hope. Hector reached into his gardening apron and pulled out a faded, folded piece of paper. It was an old address written in a graceful, flowing script. "She never moved far. She has been waiting for you to find her all this time," he said softly. "Go find your real mother, and then come back to finish this. She will be a strength for you." I left Havenwood immediately and drove toward the address Hector had given me, a renewed purpose guiding my hands on the wheel. But I knew I still needed one final, undeniable piece of evidence that my family couldn't argue away. I needed a witness to the murder. Asher's ledger hadn't said anything about the exact location of the crash, but Hector had provided one more small detail. The accident had happened near an old, unused train track that was home to a small, hidden community of people who were homeless. I spent the next 2 days searching quietly near the train tracks. Finally, I found a man named Leo, who had lived near the cliffside 10 years ago. He was old, tired, and clearly terrified, but I approached him gently and showed him a photo of Asher and Tessa. His eyes went wide with deep, instant recognition. He admitted that he had been hiding for years, scared that the scary man who had killed them would come back for him next. I promised him total safety and protection. Leo leaned in, his voice a low, shaky whisper. "I saw the whole terrible thing," he confessed. "I have the footage on an old phone. The black car. I remember it clearly. It didn't just crash. It ran them off the road on purpose, deliberately sending them right over the cliff. It was a cold, calculated murder." Leo immediately showed me the old cell phone he had been hiding all this time. The video footage was stored on the memory card. The quality was surprisingly clear. The video showed Asher's blue sedan driving along the winding cliff road. Then a huge black sedan, driving completely recklessly, sped up from behind. The black car deliberately swerved, slamming hard into the back corner of Asher's car. The impact sent Asher and Tessa's car careening violently over the cliff edge and down into the darkness. There was no doubt at all. It was an intentional, cold-blooded act. I watched the short video clip 2 times, feeling a terrifying mix of grief, triumph, and intense coldness. Asher and Tessa had been murdered by a monster my father had hired. Then, I focused on the moment right before the black car hit. The video clearly captured the license plate of the black sedan. I wrote down the number immediately, my hand completely steady. The license plate was traceable, and the video was irrefutable, undeniable proof of my father's crime. With the video evidence, the ledger, and the voicemail, the case against my family was completely sealed. I knew I had everything I needed to destroy them completely. The stage was set, and the grand finale would be at the memorial. My family, completely smug in their arrogance, had no idea what was coming for them. I called the police right away, telling them I had irrefutable video evidence and financial documents showing a conspiracy to commit murder and massive embezzlement. I asked for a meeting with a high-ranking officer. My contact, a detective named Officer Reynolds, was completely shocked but took my evidence very seriously. He immediately launched a formal, quiet investigation into Alastair and Blair for conspiracy to commit murder and severe financial crimes. He studied the video and the ledger, his face grave. He agreed that the public memorial service would be the perfect, most public place for the final execution of justice. I explained to Officer Reynolds that my family was extremely well connected and would attempt to escape the country or erase evidence if they suspected anything. He agreed with my plan. He told me he and a team of state police officers would be on standby, disguised as guests in the back of the memorial hall, ready to move the moment I presented the evidence. The trap was set perfectly. The day of the memorial service arrived. I drove to Havenwood, feeling a strange, quiet sense of calm. I knew this was my last free day in the gilded cage of my family's old house. I wore a simple black dress, and in the small purse at my side, I carried the old cell phone, the digital files, and Asher's ledger. The clock was ticking quickly toward the reading of the will. The memorial service was held in the grand ballroom of Havenwood. The room was completely packed with the city's wealthiest, most important, and most influential people. The very people my father, Alastair, relied on for his business and social power. The air was thick with their fake sympathy and their silent, cold judgment directed toward me, the black sheep who had returned. I sat stiffly in the back row, surrounded by people who all believed I was the reason Asher was dead. The family was sitting in the front row, wearing expensive, dark clothes and looking appropriately sad and distinguished. They all looked at me with cold fury. Then the moment of truth arrived. Alastair, my father and the murderer of my brother, stood up to give the main eulogy. He walked slowly to the podium, his face carefully composed into a look of deep, suffering grief. His entire purpose was to cement the family's 10-year-old lie, to publicly paint Asher as the reckless victim and me as the dangerous criminal. He began to speak about tragic loss and the unforeseen cruelty of fate. The lie tasted like poison in the air. As Alastair paused to carefully wipe a dry, fake tear from his eye, the moment of opportunity arrived. I stood up slowly from my seat in the back. I walked purposefully down the long aisle, my footsteps making a quiet, steady sound on the thick carpet. I felt the cold, hard weight of Asher's truth in my hand. I reached the podium before Alastair could say another word. He looked utterly shocked and completely outraged by the interruption. He tried to physically block me, whispering fiercely, "Get back to your seat, Juniper, right now." I ignored him completely. I gently, calmly took the expensive microphone from his hand, not making a loud scene, just moving with complete, unshakable confidence. All the hundreds of eyes in the room were focused completely on me now, the silence loud and intense. Alastair tried to physically wrestle the microphone away from me, but I held it tightly, my grip firm. I looked at the sea of famous, wealthy faces in the room, bankers, politicians, society leaders, and then I looked directly at my father. I didn't shout or cry. I spoke in a clear, strong voice that carried a massive, undeniable power. My father's version of events is a complete and absolute fiction. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice ringing with finality. Today, we will finally honor my brother Asher's memory with the complete and painful truth about his death. I paused for a long, powerful moment, letting the truth sink into the silent room. I reached down to the small table and took out Asher's heavy, leather-bound accounting ledger, holding it high for everyone to see. I connected my phone to the ballroom's huge projection screen. I was ready to show them the real story. I immediately projected the first page of Asher's secret ledger onto the massive screen at the front of the ballroom. The screen now clearly displayed rows and columns of cold, hard numbers, the direct, detailed evidence of Alastair's massive embezzlement from the family's charitable foundation. The crowd gasped loudly, a huge wave of shock washing over the rich, formal audience. The names of the secret offshore accounts and the huge, suspicious transfers were all visible for the entire city to see. I turned the page, showing the clear evidence of Silas Rook, the hitman. I then showed the grainy photograph of the man with the huge snake tattoo. This man, I stated clearly, is a known associate of organized crime. My father, Alastair Dawson, transferred millions of dollars from the foundation directly into this man's bank accounts. Alistair's face was no longer just angry. It was a mask of pure, complete panic, his eyes darting frantically toward the doors. He lunged toward me screaming, "She's lying. She's completely insane." I immediately held up my hand to stop him and spoke over his panicked yelling. I then clicked to the next slide, which was the final devastating hidden secret that crushed the last bit of the Dawson family's reputation. I immediately projected the tiny, crumpled sonogram photo onto the massive screen, blowing it up to a huge size so every person in the room could clearly see the tiny, developing life. The image of the baby, the label Baby Dawson, was now a huge, silent accusation against the entire family. I let the audience look at it for a long, sad minute. My brother Asher and his girlfriend Tessa were not just killed. I explained, my voice thick with emotion. A future grandchild, a child of the Dawson family, was also killed with them that night. A completely innocent, unborn Dawson was completely erased by this family's unbelievable greed and fear that the truth would come out. The rich, powerful people in the room were completely horrified. This was no longer just a financial scandal. It was a story of a horrific, unforgivable crime against life itself. Then, a voice rang out from the audience. Eleanor, Tessa's mother, stood up from her chair, her entire body trembling with years of suppressed pain and rage. She pointed a shaking, accusing finger directly at Alistair, who was now utterly defeated. Eleanor screamed the final, terrible word in a voice that was both heartbroken and incredibly powerful. "Murderer. He is a murderer of my daughter and her child." I knew I couldn't wait any longer. Blair, my sister, was completely panicked and desperate. She suddenly lunged at me, trying to grab the microphone and stop the entire presentation. I quickly stepped back, but before she could reach me, I pressed the large play button on my old cell phone, which was connected to the ballroom's massive sound system. The full, shocking voicemail immediately rang out through the speakers. The whole room heard Blair's hysterical, terrified voice from 10 years ago, screaming at our father. Every word was crystal clear. "I won't be your scapegoat like Juniper. You handle Silas. You call off the hit. It's gone completely wrong." The entire crowd was horrified. They now knew the family's deepest, darkest secret. Blair immediately collapsed onto the stage, completely defeated, covering her face and crying hysterically. As Blair sobbed uncontrollably, she looked up at our father one last time, making a final, panicked accusation against him that sealed his fate. She screamed loudly. "It was Father's idea. He hired the man. I just helped with the cover-up." The room was completely silent, except for Blair's hysterical sobs. The final, horrifying truth had been spoken. I took a deep breath, fighting back my own emotional exhaustion. I knew I had to deliver the final piece of the devastating proof. I clicked the button on my phone one last time, and the ballroom's massive screen immediately began playing Leo's cell phone video. The people in the room watched in stunned, horrified silence as the video played out the entire cold-blooded murder. The clear footage showed Silas Rook's black car deliberately swerving, ramming into Asher's car, and pushing it violently off the high cliff. It was impossible to deny. This was not an accident. This was premeditated murder caught on video. The murmurs and gasps from the audience immediately turned into complete, cold condemnation. Alistair, my father, was completely frozen, his face devoid of all color, his eyes staring blankly at the screen. The entire family empire had been completely exposed and utterly destroyed in less than 15 minutes. As the sickening video clip ended, the huge, heavy doors at the back of the ballroom suddenly swung open. Officer Reynolds and a full team of state police officers, who had been standing by in the hallway, walked quickly and purposefully into the room. They walked straight toward the front of the stage, their serious faces showing the only way this could end. The state police officers quickly moved to the stage. Officer Reynolds immediately walked up to Alistair and Blair. He pulled out his official badge and read them their rights in a clear, steady, emotionless voice. Alistair, the powerful, controlling father who had ruled this family for decades, did not resist. He simply stood there, a broken, defeated shell of a man. Blair, still hysterical, was gently but firmly escorted away by a female officer. The sight of the police arresting them in front of the entire community, in the very ballroom where they had always been the most powerful, was a scene of unbelievable, final justice. The crowd of society's elite immediately parted for the police, their whispers loud and constant. They had come to a memorial for a tragedy. They left as witnesses to a major criminal act and a murder conspiracy. The family's 10-year-old lie was over forever. As he was led away in handcuffs, Alistair looked directly at me one last time, his eyes burning with a final, desperate, unforgiving hatred. His voice was a low, desperate snarl, meant only for me. "You are no daughter of mine, Juniper. You are nothing." The words no longer hurt me. They were the final, satisfying proof that I had won the war, not just the battle. As the police led Alistair and Blair out of the ballroom, the lawyers immediately rushed the stage. My mother, Cordelia, who had dedicated her entire life to maintaining the family's perfect, wealthy appearance, was completely ignored by the police and the lawyers. She stood alone for a long moment, watching the complete, total collapse of her life's work. Her face was gray and completely empty. The shock of the public shame and the destruction of her powerful image was the final thing that broke her. She suddenly collapsed completely onto the floor, the heavy weight of her entire, fake life finally crushing her. I walked slowly past the chaos and looked down at the woman who had pretended to be my mother for 20 years. I didn't feel any hatred or any pity, only a cold, profound emptiness. The woman who had treated me with constant disgust and hatred was now just a victim of her own coldness and her husband's greed. The pain she had caused me for a decade was nothing compared to the pain of the truth I had just revealed. The police officers immediately called for medical assistance for her, but I knew the damage was not just physical, it was final. I looked down at her completely empty face. "You were never a mother to me, Cordelia," I whispered, the final sentence of my 10-year-long emotional journey. I turned and walked away without looking back at the house I had finally set fire to. The scandal was the biggest, most talked about story of the decade. The police immediately froze the assets of the Dawson family empire and the charitable foundation to begin their intense investigation into the massive embezzlement. While the police and the lawyers were busy with the legal cleanup, the family's chief counsel, a nervous old man, called me into a small, quiet room to read the official updated will. He was shaking as he spoke. He revealed that Asher, completely aware of the danger he was in, had legally signed all of his shares of the family company, the vast majority of the company, over to me, Juniper. My jaw completely dropped. Asher had been planning for this, ensuring that if his father killed him, the power would go to the only person he could ever trust, me. I was now the majority shareholder of the entire Dawson family business. The power and the control were finally mine. I didn't want the horrible company, but I wanted the power to make things right. The first thing I did with my new power was to make a completely public, devastating announcement. I immediately announced the complete dissolution and closure of the terrible family foundation. I declared that all of the remaining funds would be used to create a completely new charity called the Asher and Tessa Dawson Legacy Fund, dedicated to victims of violent crime and their families. It was the only way to truly honor my brother and his love. With my life and my powerful new purpose completely set, the next step was to find my real mother, Exiled. Free from the fear of Alistair and Cordelia, I traveled immediately to the small address Hector had given me. It was a cozy, small house near the coast, far away from the cold, massive walls of Havenwood. I knocked on the wooden door, my heart pounding with a decade of longing and sadness. The door opened and there she was. Exiled. She was a kind-eyed woman, a talented artist living a simple, peaceful life, painting beautiful pictures on canvases. She was nothing like the cold, hard woman who had raised me. She looked at me, and her eyes filled with immediate, deep recognition and tears. She knew exactly who I was. I didn't have to say a single word. She knew I had come to her, because I was finally free. She reached out, and our embrace was completely wordless. A decade of lost time, painful separation, and deep longing finally healing in that single, profound moment. I had finally found my true family, and I was finally home. A year later, my life was completely unrecognizable. The Asher and Tessa Dawson Legacy Fund was flourishing, helping dozens of families find justice and support. Exiled and I ran the charity together. She brought kindness and art, and I brought strategy and financial control. The old estate, Havenwood, that awful prison of lies, had been completely sold off, and the money was all poured into the charity. I was living in a simple, happy apartment by the sea, finally at peace. Alistair and Blair were in prison, awaiting trial for murder and financial crimes, and Cordelia was living in a secluded nursing home, completely alone and forgotten. The ghosts of the past no longer haunted me. The ghost of Asher was finally at peace, and so was I. My life was finally my own, built on honesty and purpose, not lies and greed. I looked out at the ocean, enjoying the quiet life I had earned. Then a thick envelope arrived at the office. The return address was the state prison. I knew exactly who it was from without even opening it. It was a long, messy, handwritten letter from my sister, Blair. I opened the letter slowly, my curiosity winning over my sense of peace. The letter was thick and rambling, full of self-pity, tears, and accusations. Blair's letter was exactly what I expected. She completely blamed everyone but herself. She blamed me for being too aggressive. She blamed Alistair for giving the orders. She blamed Cordelia for teaching them to value money over family. She never once admitted her part in the crime, or expressed any sadness for Asher and Tessa. She wrote that she was being unfairly exiled by the criminal justice system. I quickly put the letter down on my desk, feeling a strong, familiar wave of disappointment. Some people never, ever learn. They simply swap one prison for another, always living inside their own deep lies. I knew that the cycle of their cruelty was completely broken now. The truth had saved me and destroyed them. I had created a new legacy of good from their evil. I picked up the phone and smiled, calling my old friend Leo, the man who had provided the crucial video evidence. I offered him a full-time, honest job managing the large property, where our new foundation headquarters was located. Leo accepted immediately, his voice filled with sincere gratitude. I knew that the foundation wasn't just about saving lives. It was about giving honest, good people a second well-deserved chance at happiness. I sat on the small wooden porch of my quiet seaside house, watching the evening sun set over the calm ocean. The letter from Blair was still sitting on the porch railing, unfinished and unimportant. My real mother, Exiled, came out with 2 cups of warm herbal tea. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the gentle quiet that comes from a life lived with honesty and purpose. I picked up Blair's pathetic, self-pitying letter one last time. I didn't need to read the end. The final chapter of their life was written in concrete and steel. I looked at Exiled, my kind, true mother, and smiled a completely genuine, peaceful smile. A smile that had been a decade in the making. I had lost a fake family and found a real one. I had lost a brother but gained a powerful, meaningful legacy. The most important thing I had gained was my freedom from their fear and their lies. I tore the letter in half slowly, and tossed the pieces into the empty trash can next to the chair. Some ghosts, I said softly to Exiled, watching the paper fall away, aren't worth listening to anymore. For the first time in 10 long years, the ghost of Asher was finally at peace, and so was I. The peace was the final, total victory. If you enjoyed this revenge story, like and subscribe for more.